The silence that followed Agnes Bloomfield's words was so complete that even the crackling of the fireplace in Lord Ashworth's drawing room seemed to pause in shock. 20 pairs of aristocratic eyes stared at the woman who had just committed social suicide with a single devastating sentence. "No one marries a fat woman, sir," she had said with brutal honesty to the marriage-minded Lord Fitzherbert, who had been boasting about his requirements for a wife. "But I know how to cook, manage a household, and make a man comfortable. Perhaps that might be worth something to someone someday." Lady Pemberton's fan snapped shut with an audible crack. Mrs. Ashworth's teacup rattled against its saucer. Even the servants hovering near the doorway seemed frozen in mortification at witnessing such an unprecedented breach of social decorum. Agnes stood in the center of the elegant room, her ample figure draped in a serviceable brown dress that did nothing to flatter her considerable curves, her graying brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her plain, round face flushed with the humiliation of having spoken such truth aloud. At 38, she had long ago abandoned any illusions about her place in society's marriage market, but never before had she voiced that reality so starkly in such elevated company. She had been invited to this gathering not as a potential bride, that notion was laughable, but as a companion to her elderly cousin, Lady Theodora Ashworth, who required assistance with her correspondence and social obligations. Agnes had accepted the position gratefully, knowing that her options as an unmarried woman of modest means and unfortunate appearance were severely limited. She had expected to remain invisible, to blend into the wallpaper as spinsters of her station were supposed to do, but Lord Fitzherbert's pompous declaration that he would only consider marrying a woman who was young, beautiful, accomplished in the feminine arts, and possessed of a fortune sufficient to maintain herself in style had struck something raw and painful in Agnes's chest. The casual dismissal of women like herself, women who had value beyond their appearance and dowries, had loosened her tongue in a moment of reckless honesty. Now she stood exposed and humiliated, waiting for the inevitable explosion of outrage and disgust that would surely follow her shocking breach of propriety. Lord Fitzherbert himself appeared to be choking on his brandy, his florid face turning an alarming shade of purple as he struggled to process what he had just heard. The other guests seemed equally stunned, their expressions ranging from horrified fascination to barely concealed amusement at witnessing such an extraordinary social catastrophe. It was into this charged atmosphere that Duke Percival Whitcomb chose to make his entrance. The Duke of Ravenshollow commanded attention wherever he went, not merely because of his exalted rank, but because of his imposing physical presence and the aura of quiet authority that surrounded him like an invisible cloak. At 42, he was a man in his prime, tall and powerfully built, with silver-streaked dark hair, penetrating blue eyes, and the kind of aristocratic features that had been passed down through generations of noble breeding. He had been widowed for 3 years, since his beloved wife Catherine had died in childbirth along with their son, and society had been buzzing with speculation about when he might remarry. As one of the wealthiest and most influential peers in England, he could have his choice of any eligible woman in the kingdom. His presence at social gatherings was always cause for excitement among ambitious mothers and hopeful daughters, but the scene that greeted him in Lord Ashworth's drawing room was unlike anything he had encountered in his extensive experience of London society. The tension in the air was palpable, and every face turned toward him with expressions that suggested they had just witnessed something scandalous and unprecedented. "Your Grace," Lord Ashworth stammered, rising hastily to greet his most distinguished guest. "How delightful that you could join us. We were having a discussion about matrimonial preferences." Percival's sharp gaze swept the room, taking in the obvious discomfort of the guests and the frozen tableau before him. His eyes settled on the woman standing in the center of the room, a woman he had never seen before, but whose posture and expression told him everything he needed to know about what had transpired. Agnes Bloomfield was not a beautiful woman by any conventional standard. She was, as she had so bluntly stated, fat, generously curved in an age that prized willowy figures, with a soft, round face that bore the marks of disappointment and resignation. Her clothes were well made but plain, chosen for practicality rather than fashion, and her entire demeanor suggested someone who had long ago learned to make herself invisible in social situations. But there was something in her eyes, a spark of intelligence, a flash of defiant dignity that caught Percival's attention and held it. This was not a woman who was ashamed of who she was, despite the obvious humiliation of her current situation. This was a woman who had spoken truth in a room full of people, who trafficked in polite lies and social pretensions. "I see," Percival said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. "And what precisely were the matrimonial preferences being discussed?" Lord Fitzherbert, emboldened by the Duke's presence and eager to regain his social footing, puffed out his chest and repeated his earlier declaration. "I was explaining, Your Grace, that a gentleman of breeding must be selective in his choice of bride. Youth, beauty, accomplishments, and fortune, these are the essential qualities that any sensible man should require." "I see," Percival repeated, his tone giving nothing away. "And how did the other guests respond to this wisdom?" The uncomfortable silence stretched until Lady Pemberton, unable to contain herself any longer, gestured dramatically toward Agnes. "Your Grace, you cannot imagine the shocking thing that woman just said. She actually declared that no one would marry a fat woman, but that she could cook. In front of everyone, the impropriety is beyond belief." Percival's gaze shifted back to Agnes, who had gone very pale but maintained her dignity despite the obvious mortification. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and he could see the slight tremor that betrayed her emotional state. But her chin was raised and her eyes met his directly. "Is that what you said, madam?" he asked, his voice gentle but carrying clearly through the room. Agnes swallowed hard, knowing that her answer would determine whether this humiliation would end quickly or be drawn out into an even more excruciating ordeal. But she had already committed herself to honesty, and she would not retreat now. "Yes, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "I said that no one marries a fat woman, but that I know how to cook, manage a household, and make a man comfortable. I spoke out of turn, and I apologize for disrupting the gathering." The room held its collective breath, waiting for the Duke's response. Would he join in the condemnation? Would he deliver the cutting set-down that would complete Agnes's social destruction? Or would he simply ignore her existence, as was proper for a man of his station, when confronted with such unseemly behavior from an inferior? What Percival Whitcomb did next would be talked about in London, drawing rooms for years to come. He walked across the room with measured steps until he stood directly in front of Agnes, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The entire assembly watched in fascination as the most eligible duke in England positioned himself within arm's reach of the woman who had just committed social suicide. "Miss," he prompted quietly. "Bloomfield, Your Grace. Agnes Bloomfield." "Miss Bloomfield," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised everyone present, including Agnes herself. "You speak of cooking and household management as though these were lesser accomplishments. But tell me, can Lord Fitzherbert prepare a meal that would nourish and comfort a family? Can Lady Pemberton organize a household so efficiently that every member feels valued and cared for? Can any of the accomplished young ladies present create a home where a man might find true peace and contentment after the struggles of the day?" The questions hung in the air like a challenge, and Agnes found herself staring at the Duke in amazement. Was he actually defending her? Was he suggesting that her practical skills had value in a world that prized only ornamental accomplishments? I believe those skills have value, Your Grace," she said carefully, unsure where this extraordinary conversation was leading. "Indeed they do," Percival replied, his voice growing stronger and more decisive. "In fact, I would venture to say that a woman who possesses such skills, who speaks with such honesty about her own worth, who has the courage to stand by her convictions even in the face of social disapproval, such a woman would make a far better wife than someone chosen merely for her appearance or her father's bank account." The gasps that echoed through the room were audible now, and Agnes felt her knees go weak with shock. The Duke of Ravenshollow was not only defending her, he was suggesting that she would make a good wife. The impossibility of it made her head spin, but Percival was not finished. He turned to address the room at large, his commanding presence ensuring that every word would be heard and remembered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of noble breeding, "I have had the privilege of moving in the highest circles of society for many years. I have met countless women who were celebrated for their beauty, their accomplishments, and their fortunes, and yet, in all that time, I have rarely encountered the kind of honest self-awareness and practical wisdom that Miss Bloomfield has just demonstrated." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "She speaks of her appearance with candor, rather than false modesty. She acknowledges her skills without boasting or diminishing their importance. She offers what she has to give, without pretending to be something she is not. These are qualities that I find infinitely more attractive than the shallow accomplishments that are typically paraded before eligible gentlemen. Agnes felt tears prick at her eyes as she listened to the Duke's extraordinary defense. Never in her life had anyone spoken of her with such respect, such recognition of her worth as a person, rather than her failures as a conventional woman. In fact, Percival continued, his eyes returning to Agnes's face, I find myself wondering if Miss Bloomfield might consider allowing me to call upon her. I should very much like to learn more about her household management skills, her culinary expertise, and her thoughts on what makes a marriage truly successful. The silence that followed this declaration was so profound that it seemed to echo. Agnes stared at the Duke in complete disbelief, certain that she must have misheard or misunderstood. Our Duke, the Duke of Ravenshollow, was asking permission to court her. It was impossible, unprecedented, utterly beyond the realm of possibility. Your Grace, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't understand. Surely you cannot be serious. I am entirely serious, Miss Bloomfield, Percival replied, his blue eyes steady and sincere. I have been widowed for 3 years, and in that time I have been pursued by every eligible woman in London and half the continent. They have offered me beauty, accomplishments, connections, and fortunes, but not one of them has offered me honesty, practical partnership, or the promise of a home built on mutual respect rather than social advantage. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. You spoke of making a man comfortable, Miss Bloomfield. After 3 years of loneliness and the shallow attentions of fortune hunters, I find that prospect more appealing than all the beauty and accomplishments in the world. Agnes felt the room spinning around her as the magnitude of what was happening began to sink in. The Duke of Ravenshollow, one of the most powerful and sought-after men in England, was not only defending her against social ridicule, but actually expressing interest in courting her. It was like something from a fairy tale, too wonderful and impossible to be real. Your Grace, I am deeply honored by your words, she managed to say, her voice trembling with emotion. But I must ask, are you certain you understand what you are suggesting? I am not young, I am not beautiful, I have no fortune or connections. I am exactly what I said, a fat woman who knows how to cook. Society would be scandalized by such a match. Percival's smile was warm and genuine, transforming his aristocratic features in a way that made Agnes's heart skip a beat. Miss Bloomfield, I have spent my entire life doing what society expected of me. I married the woman my family chose. I fulfilled my duties as a peer. I played by all the rules that govern our world. And while I was blessed with a happy marriage, I learned that true contentment comes not from meeting society's expectations, but from finding genuine compatibility and mutual respect. He glanced around the room at the shocked faces of the other guests before returning his attention to Agnes. As for society's opinion, I find that I care far less about their approval than I once did. The loss of my wife and child taught me that life is too short and too precious to waste on the shallow pursuits that occupy most of our peers. I would rather spend my remaining years with someone who values substance over style than continue the empty charade of fashionable society. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Agnes felt something she had never experienced before, the intoxicating possibility that she might actually be valued and desired for who she truly was, rather than dismissed for who she was not. Your Grace, she said softly, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, if you are truly serious about this extraordinary proposition, then yes, I would be honored to receive your call. The collective gasp from the assembled guests was like a physical force, but neither Agnes nor Percival paid any attention to their shocked audience. They were focused entirely on each other, two people who had found an unexpected connection in the most unlikely of circumstances. Excellent, Percival said, his satisfaction evident. Then I shall call upon you tomorrow afternoon, if that would be convenient. Perhaps you could show me some of those household management skills you mentioned, and we could discuss what each of us hopes to find in a marriage partner. Yes, Your Grace. I would like that very much. As the Duke took his leave, bowing formally to Agnes before nodding to the other guests, the room remained frozen in stunned silence. It was only after his footsteps had faded down the hallway that the explosion of shocked conversation began. Did that really just happen? The Duke of Ravenshollow, interested in that woman? It must be some kind of jest, surely. But he seemed so serious. Agnes stood in the center of the chaos, still reeling from the extraordinary turn her life had just taken. Less than an hour ago, she had been an invisible spinster, resigned to her fate as a paid companion. Now she was the object of interest from the most eligible duke in England, and her entire future had been transformed by a moment of brutal honesty and an unexpected champion. As she made her way out of the drawing room, ignoring the whispered conversations and shocked stares that followed her, Agnes allowed herself to hope for the first time in years that perhaps there was a place in the world for a woman like her after all. The morning after, Agnes Bloomfield woke the next morning with the disorienting sensation that she had dreamed the entire extraordinary encounter at Lord Ashworth's gathering. Surely no duke would actually express interest in courting a woman like her based on a single conversation, no matter how unconventional. The whole episode must have been a product of her imagination, brought on by too much stress and too little sleep. But as she sat up in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters of Lady Theodora's townhouse, the events of the previous evening came flooding back with crystal clarity. She could still hear the Duke's voice defending her, still see the sincere expression in his blue eyes as he asked permission to call upon her. Most vividly of all, she could remember the feeling of being valued and respected for the first time in her adult life. "Agnes?" Lady Theodora's imperious voice rang through the house, accompanied by the sharp rap of her walking stick against the floor. "Agnes, come here immediately. I must speak with you about this catastrophe." With a sinking heart, Agnes realized that her elderly cousin had already heard about the previous evening's events. News traveled fast in London society, especially when it involved something as scandalous as a duke expressing interest in an unsuitable woman. She dressed quickly in her usual brown wool dress, pinned her greying hair back in its customary severe bun, and made her way to Lady Theodora's morning room. She found her cousin pacing back and forth in obvious agitation, her thin frame vibrating with indignation. "Sit down," Lady Theodora commanded, pointing to a straight-backed chair with her walking stick. "I have just received 3 separate accounts of your shocking behavior last evening, and I demand an explanation." Agnes sat obediently, folding her hands in her lap and preparing herself for the lecture she knew was coming. Lady Theodora had taken her in out of family obligation rather than affection, and Agnes had always been acutely aware of her precarious position in the household. "How could you humiliate me so completely?" Lady Theodora continued, her voice rising with each word. "Making such vulgar declarations about your appearance, disrupting a respectable gathering with your inappropriate comments, and then, most shocking of all, somehow entangling the Duke of Ravenshollow in your disgraceful display." "Cousin Theodora," Agnes began quietly, "I spoke out of turn and I apologize for any embarrassment I may have caused you, but I must point out that the Duke chose to involve himself in the conversation. I certainly did not seek his attention or encourage his interest." "Interest," Lady Theodora shrieked, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. "You delude yourself if you think a man of his standing could have any genuine interest in someone like you. He was obviously mocking you, making sport of your presumption for his own amusement." The words hit Agnes like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had endured years of such criticism from her cousin, and she had learned to protect herself by maintaining her dignity, even in the face of deliberate cruelty. "Perhaps you are right," she said evenly. "Time will tell whether his intentions were genuine or merely amusing himself at my expense." "Time will tell nothing because you will not be receiving any callers," Lady Theodora declared triumphantly. "I have already sent word that you are indisposed and will not be at home to visitors. This ridiculous farce ends here and now." Agnes felt her heart sink as the reality of her situation became clear. Lady Theodora had the power to prevent the Duke from calling, to end this extraordinary possibility before it had even begun. As a dependent relative living on charity, Agnes had no rights, no independence, no ability to make her own choices about her future. Furthermore, Lady Theodora continued, clearly enjoying her power over the situation, "I have decided that your presence in London has become too much of a liability. I am sending you to my estate in Yorkshire, where you can live quietly and cause no further embarrassment to the family name." "Yorkshire," Agnes repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The prospect of exile to the remote countryside, away from any possibility of seeing the Duke again, filled her with despair. "Yes, Yorkshire. You will leave tomorrow morning. Mrs. Hartwell, my housekeeper there, is getting old and needs assistance. You can make yourself useful managing the household and staying well away from polite society." Agnes sat in stunned silence as the magnitude of her cousin's decision sank in. Just when it seemed that her life might take a different direction, when she had dared to hope for something better, She was being banished like a criminal. The brief, shining moment of possibility that the Duke's attention had represented was being snuffed out before it could develop into anything real. "I understand," she said finally, her voice hollow with disappointment. "I will pack my things and be ready to leave in the morning." "See that you are, and Agnes," Lady Theodora's voice carried a note of warning. "If you have any foolish notions about contacting the Duke or attempting to continue this absurd charade, I advise you to abandon them immediately. Men of his station do not marry women like you, and the sooner you accept that reality, the better off you will be." Agnes spent the rest of the morning packing her few possessions into a single worn carpet bag, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she was about to lose the first real chance at happiness she had ever been offered. As she folded her simple dresses and gathered her books, she tried to convince herself that Lady Theodora was probably right, that the Duke's interest had been nothing more than a momentary whim or a cruel jest designed to amuse himself at her expense. But she could not forget the sincerity in his voice, the warmth in his eyes, the genuine respect with which he had spoken of her qualities. Whatever his motivations, she was certain that his defense of her had been real, and the possibility that he might actually have meant his proposal to call upon her filled her with a longing so intense it was almost painful. At precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon, the time when fashionable calls were typically made, Agnes heard the sound of an elegant carriage drawing up outside Lady Theodora's townhouse. Her heart leaped with hope and terror as she recognized the distinctive coat of arms on the carriage door. The Duke of Ravenshollow had come, just as he had promised. She pressed herself against her bedroom window, watching as he stepped down from the carriage with the fluid grace that marked him as a man accustomed to command. He was even more imposing in the afternoon light than he had been the previous evening, his tall frame impeccably dressed in a dark blue coat that emphasized his broad shoulders and his silver-streaked hair gleaming in the sunlight. Agnes watched with growing despair as he approached the front door, knowing that he would be turned away, that Lady Theodora's servants had been instructed to deny her presence in the house. The injustice of it made her want to scream with frustration, but she was powerless to change the situation. She heard the muffled conversation at the front door, the polite but firm refusal of the butler, and then the Duke's voice, raised slightly in what sounded like surprise and displeasure. The conversation continued for several minutes, and Agnes found herself holding her breath as she tried to make out the words. Finally, she heard footsteps retreating and the sound of the carriage door closing. But instead of driving away immediately, the carriage remained stationary outside the house. Agnes watched in fascination as the Duke appeared to be writing something, his head bent over what looked like a piece of paper. After a few minutes, he stepped down from the carriage again and approached the house. This time, instead of going to the front door, he walked around to the servants' entrance at the side of the building. Agnes lost sight of him from her window, but she could hear voices in the kitchen below and then footsteps on the back stairs. A soft knock at her bedroom door made her heart race with anticipation and fear. "Miss Agnes?" It was Mary, one of the younger housemaids, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a gentleman downstairs who asked me to give you this." Agnes opened the door to find Mary holding a folded piece of paper, her eyes wide with excitement and nervousness. "He said it was very important, miss, and that I should make sure you got it without anyone else knowing." With trembling fingers, Agnes took the paper and unfolded it, recognizing immediately the bold, masculine handwriting that covered the expensive stationery. "Miss Bloomfield, I was disappointed to learn that you are indisposed and unable to receive visitors today. I hope your illness is not serious and that you will recover quickly. However, I have reason to believe that your indisposition may be more a matter of external circumstances than actual illness. If this is the case, and if you are indeed being prevented from receiving callers against your own wishes, I want you to know that I remain entirely serious about my desire to further our acquaintance. I will be staying at the Clarendon Hotel for the next several days. Should you find yourself able to communicate freely, I would welcome the opportunity to continue our conversation. I believe we have much to discuss about the practical aspects of marriage and the qualities that truly matter in a life partner. If, however, your absence today reflects your own decision rather than external pressure, I will respect your wishes and trouble you no further. I remain, with the greatest respect and anticipation, Percival Whitcomb, Duke of Ravenshollow." Agnes read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding with excitement and terror. The Duke had seen through Lady Theodora's deception and was offering her a way to contact him directly. But how could she possibly take advantage of such an opportunity when she was being sent away to Yorkshire the very next morning? "Mary," she said quietly, making a decision that would change the course of her life. "Can you keep a secret?" "Of course, miss. What do you need?" "I need you to deliver a message for me, but it must be done very carefully, and no one else in the household can know about it." Agnes sat down at the small writing desk in her room and composed a reply that took all her courage to write. "Your Grace, you are correct in your assumption that external circumstances prevent me from receiving visitors. I am being sent away to Yorkshire tomorrow morning as a result of last evening's events, and I fear this may be our only opportunity to communicate. I want you to know that your defense of me yesterday was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me, and I will treasure the memory of it regardless of what happens next. If your interest in furthering our acquaintance was genuine, then I must tell you that I share that interest completely. However, I also want you to understand exactly what you would be taking on if you were to pursue a connection with someone like me. I have no fortune, no family connections of value, and no accomplishments beyond the practical skills I mentioned. I am entirely dependent on the charity of relatives who barely tolerate my presence, and I have no power to control my own circumstances. If, knowing all of this, you still wish to continue our acquaintance, I will be at the Yorkshire estate of Lady Theodora Ashworth in the village of Thornfield, but I would understand completely if you decide that such complications are more than you wish to undertake. With gratitude for your kindness and respect for your position, Agnes Bloomfield." She sealed the letter carefully and handed it to Mary, along with a precious half-crown from her meagre savings. "Take this to the Clarendon Hotel and ask for the Duke of Ravenshollow," she instructed. "Give it only to him personally and tell no one else about this errand." "I'll be very careful, miss," Mary promised, tucking the letter into her apron. "And miss, I think what you did last night was very brave. That Lord Fitzherbert is a pompous fool, and it was time someone told him so." After Mary left, Agnes sat by her window watching the street below and wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. By tomorrow evening, she would be hundreds of miles away from London, exiled to a remote estate where she would likely spend the rest of her days in obscurity. The Duke would probably read her letter, realize the complications involved in pursuing her, and decide that his momentary interest had been a mistake. But for the first time in her life, she had taken control of her own destiny, however briefly. She had been honest about her feelings and her circumstances, and she had given him the information he needed to make an informed decision about whether to continue their extraordinary acquaintance. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the knowledge that she had been brave enough to reach for something better, even if it ultimately proved to be beyond her grasp. As the afternoon faded into evening, Agnes completed her packing and prepared for what she assumed would be her final night in London. Tomorrow would bring exile and the end of the most remarkable chapter of her life. But tonight, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her story was not yet finished. The Duke's pursuit. Percival Whitcomb read Agnes's letter 3 times in the privacy of his suite at the Clarendon Hotel, his admiration for the woman growing with each perusal. Her honesty about her circumstances, her lack of self-pity despite obvious mistreatment, and her courage in reaching out to him despite the risks involved confirmed everything he had sensed about her character during their brief encounter. The Duke was not a man given to impulsive decisions. His position required careful consideration of every action, every association, every word spoken in public. But something about Agnes Bloomfield had struck a chord deep within him, awakening feelings and desires he had thought buried with his late wife. Catherine had been everything society deemed perfect in a duchess: beautiful, accomplished, well-connected, and possessed of a substantial dowry. Their marriage had been arranged by their families, but it had grown into genuine affection and mutual respect. Her death had left him not only grieving but profoundly lonely, surrounded by people who valued his title and wealth but showed little interest in him as a man. The parade of eligible young women who had been presented to him since his period of mourning ended had only emphasized his isolation. They were all variations on the same theme: lovely, accomplished, and utterly predictable in their pursuit of his rank and fortune. Not one had shown genuine interest in his thoughts, his feelings, or his vision of what marriage should be. But Agnes Bloomfield was different. In her brutal honesty about her own limitations and her practical approach to marriage, he had glimpsed something rare and precious, a woman who might value him for himself rather than his position, who might offer genuine partnership rather than decorative companionship. The fact that she was being punished and exiled for the very qualities that attracted him only strengthened his resolve. He would not allow narrow-minded relatives and social prejudice to destroy what might be the most important relationship of his life. Percival summoned his secretary, Mr. Whitmore, and his valet Henderson, both of whom had served him faithfully for years and could be trusted with delicate matters. "Gentlemen," he said without preamble, "we are leaving for Yorkshire immediately. I want the travelling coach prepared for a long journey, and I want you to make inquiries about the exact location of Lady Theodora Ashworth's estate near the village of Thornfield." Mr. Whitmore, a thin, precise man in his 50s, looked up from his ledgers with obvious concern. "Your Grace, might I ask the purpose of this sudden journey? You have several important appointments in London next week, and the Marchioness of Pemberton's ball is—" "Cancel everything," Percival said firmly. "Send my regrets with appropriate explanations, but make it clear that I have urgent business that cannot be delayed." "Urgent business in Yorkshire, Your Grace?" Henderson, the valet, ventured carefully. He had been with the Duke since before his marriage, and had never known him to act so precipitously. "The most urgent business of my life," Percival replied, his blue eyes blazing with determination. "I am going to court a woman, gentlemen, a remarkable woman who is being treated abominably by her family and who deserves far better than the hand life has dealt her." The two servants exchanged glances, both recognizing the futility of arguing when their master had made up his mind. They had served him long enough to know that beneath his usually calm and measured demeanor lay a will of iron and a capacity for decisive action when something truly mattered to him. "Very good, Your Grace," Mr. Whitmore said with resignation. "Shall I make arrangements for accommodations in Yorkshire?" "Find the best inn within reasonable distance of Thornfield," Percival instructed. "And Whitmore, I want you to make some discreet inquiries about Lady Theodora Ashworth, her financial situation, her reputation, her connections. I suspect she may be more vulnerable to pressure than she appears, and I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." "Of course, Your Grace. And shall I prepare the usual gifts and calling cards for a formal courtship?" Percival paused, considering the unique nature of his situation. Traditional courtship rituals would be meaningless in this case, possibly even counterproductive, given Agnes's circumstances and her family's obvious disapproval. "No," he said finally, "this will require a different approach entirely. Miss Bloomfield is not a typical debutante, and her situation demands unconventional solutions. I intend to offer her something no other suitor could provide: genuine freedom and the power to choose her own destiny." The journey to Yorkshire took 2 days of hard travel, with the Duke's well-sprung carriage making excellent time on the main roads despite the October weather. Percival used the time to plan his strategy, knowing that he would likely have only one opportunity to make his case before Lady Theodora found some way to prevent further contact. He also found himself thinking deeply about what he was proposing to do. By pursuing Agnes Bloomfield, he was not only defying social convention, but potentially damaging his own reputation and political influence. The ton would be scandalized by a duke marrying so far beneath his station, and his family would be appalled by his choice. But as the miles passed and the Yorkshire countryside unfolded around them, Percival found that these concerns mattered less and less. He had spent his entire life meeting other people's expectations, fulfilling duties imposed by birth and circumstance. For once he wanted to follow his own inclinations and pursue something that promised genuine happiness rather than social approval. They reached the village of Thornfield on the afternoon of the second day, a picturesque settlement nestled in the rolling hills of the Yorkshire Dales. The local inn, the Crown and Anchor, proved to be a comfortable establishment with excellent accommodations and a proprietor who was both discreet and well-informed about local affairs. "Lady Theodora's estate?" the innkeeper, Mr. Blackwood, repeated when Percival made his inquiries. "Aye, Your Grace, Ashworth Manor is about 3 miles north of the village. Been in the family for generations, though it's not what it once was, if you take my meaning." "How so?" Percival asked, settling into a comfortable chair by the inn's fireplace with a glass of excellent local ale. "Well, Your Grace, Lady Theodora's been struggling financially for some years now. The estate's not profitable, and she's had to let most of the staff go. Word is she's been taking in paying guests and relatives to help make ends meet." This information confirmed Percival's suspicions about Lady Theodora's vulnerability. A woman in financial difficulties would be far more susceptible to persuasion, especially if that persuasion came with the promise of substantial compensation. "I see," he said thoughtfully. "And what is the local opinion of Lady Theodora's character?" Mr. Blackwood glanced around the empty taproom before leaning closer to the Duke. "She's not well liked, Your Grace, if I may speak plainly. treats the local people poorly, looks down on anyone she considers beneath her station. There's been talk that she's been quite harsh with a young lady who arrived yesterday, her cousin, I believe. The servants from the manor have been gossiping about raised voices and tears. Percival felt his jaw tighten with anger at this confirmation of Agnes's mistreatment. The thought of her being subjected to further humiliation and cruelty because of his interest in her made him more determined than ever to rescue her from her impossible situation. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Blackwood," he said, rising from his chair. "I believe I shall pay a call on Lady Theodora tomorrow morning. Please ensure that my carriage is ready early. I suspect this will be a conversation that requires my full attention." That evening, as Percival sat in his comfortable room at the inn, he composed a letter that would either secure Agnes's freedom or create a scandal that would reverberate through London society for years to come. It was a calculated risk, but one he was prepared to take for the chance at genuine happiness. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant autumn sunshine that made the Yorkshire countryside look like a painting. Percival dressed with particular care, choosing his most impressive formal attire, and ensuring that every detail of his appearance proclaimed his wealth and status. Today, he would need every advantage his position could provide. Ashworth Manor proved to be a substantial but somewhat shabby Georgian house, set in grounds that showed signs of neglect and reduced maintenance. The drive was rutted, the gardens overgrown, and the house itself needed paint and repairs that had obviously been deferred for financial reasons. Lady Theodora received him in a drawing room that had once been elegant, but now showed the unmistakable signs of genteel poverty, faded fabrics, worn carpets, and furniture that had seen better days. She herself was a thin, sharp-featured woman in her 70s, dressed in black silk that had been fashionable a decade earlier, and jewelry that, while genuine, was clearly being worn to impress rather than for pleasure. "Your Grace," she said with a deep curtsy that emphasized both her respect for his rank and her surprise at his unexpected visit. "What an honor to receive you at Ashworth Manor. To what do I owe this extraordinary pleasure?" "Lady Theodora," Percival replied with a formal bow, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of noble breeding. "I have come to discuss a matter of mutual interest, specifically your cousin, Miss Agnes Bloomfield." The change in Lady Theodora's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her face flushed with anger and embarrassment, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Your Grace, I must apologize for my cousin's shocking behavior in London. I assure you she has been severely reprimanded for her inappropriate conduct, and she will cause no further embarrassment to anyone. She is here to live quietly and learn proper behavior." "On the contrary," Percival said calmly. Settling into the chair, she indicated with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding any room he entered. "Miss Bloomfield's behavior was exemplary. Her honesty and practical wisdom impressed me greatly, which is why I am here." Lady Theodora stared at him in obvious confusion. I don't understand, Your Grace. Surely you cannot be serious about, that is, a man of your position could not possibly be interested in a woman of Miss Bloomfield's qualities." Percival finished for her, his tone growing cooler. "I assure you, Lady Theodora, I am entirely serious. I have come to Yorkshire specifically to court your cousin, with the intention of making her my wife, if she will have me." The silence that followed this declaration was so complete that the ticking of the mantel clock seemed unnaturally loud. Lady Theodora's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate hope that made her suddenly look much older and more vulnerable. "Your Grace," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "surely you cannot be serious. She is not suitable for a man of your standing. She has no fortune, no connections, no beauty or accomplishments. She is a burden I have taken on out of family duty, nothing more." "And yet," Percival replied, his voice carrying a note of steel that made Lady Theodora shrink back in her chair, "she possesses qualities that I value far more than conventional beauty or social connections. She has intelligence, honesty, practical skills, and the courage to speak truth in a world full of polite lies. These are the qualities I seek in a wife." Lady Theodora's mind was clearly racing as she tried to process this extraordinary turn of events. A duke, a real duke, was sitting in her drawing room declaring his intention to marry her despised cousin. The implications were staggering, both socially and financially. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "even if what you say is true, even if you are genuinely interested in Agnes, surely you must realize that such a match would be irregular. Society would never accept it. Society will accept whatever I choose to make them accept, Percival replied, with the quiet confidence of a man who had never doubted his own power. As for irregularity, I find that far preferable to the tedious predictability of conventional matches. He leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes fixed intently on Lady Theodora's face. But I did not come here to debate the wisdom of my choice, Lady Theodora. I came to inform you of my intentions and to request your cooperation in allowing me to court Miss Bloomfield properly. My cooperation? She repeated, her voice rising with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Indeed, I am prepared to be quite generous in my appreciation for your assistance in this matter. I understand that maintaining an estate like Ashworth Manor can be challenging in these times. The offer hung in the air between them, unspoken but clearly understood. Lady Theodora's eyes widened as she grasped the full implications of what the Duke was suggesting. How generous, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Generous enough to ensure that Ashworth Manor is restored to its former glory and that you never again need to worry about financial difficulties," Percival replied. "Provided, of course, that Miss Bloomfield is free to make her own choices about her future, without interference or coercion." Lady Theodora sat in stunned silence for several minutes, clearly struggling to reconcile her prejudices against Agnes with the extraordinary opportunity that was being presented to her. Finally, greed and practicality won out over pride and social convention. "Your Grace," she said with obvious reluctance, "if you are truly determined to pursue this unusual course, then I suppose I have no choice but to cooperate. Agnes is, after all, a grown woman capable of making her own decisions." "Excellent," Percival said, his satisfaction evident. "Then I would like to see Miss Bloomfield immediately, if you please." "Of course, Your Grace. I shall send for her at once." As Lady Theodora rang for a servant to fetch Agnes, Percival allowed himself a moment of triumph. The first and most difficult obstacle had been overcome. Now came the even more challenging task of convincing Agnes herself that his interest was genuine and that she deserved the happiness he was offering her. When Agnes appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, Percival felt his breath catch in his throat. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her soft curves enhanced by a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her graying hair neatly arranged in a style that emphasized the gentle roundness of her face. But it was the expression in her eyes, hope warring with disbelief, that made his heart race with anticipation. "Miss Bloomfield?" he said, rising from his chair with a warm smile that transformed his aristocratic features. "How delightful to see you again. I trust you are well?" Agnes stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes moving between the Duke's kind face and her cousin's suddenly solicitous expression. The transformation in Lady Theodora's demeanor was so complete and unexpected that Agnes wondered if she was dreaming. "Your Grace," she managed to say, her voice trembling with emotion, I cannot believe you are here. How did you find me?" "Your letter provided excellent directions," Percival replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "And I am a man who keeps his promises. I said I wished to further our acquaintance, and I meant it." Lady Theodora cleared her throat pointedly, clearly uncomfortable with the obvious affection in the Duke's voice. "Perhaps you would like to take a walk in the gardens, Your Grace. The grounds are quite pleasant, despite the season." "An excellent suggestion," Percival agreed, offering his arm to Agnes. "Miss Bloomfield, would you do me the honor?" Agnes took his arm with trembling fingers, still unable to fully comprehend that this was really happening. As they walked through the French doors onto the terrace, she felt as though she were moving through a dream. The gardens of Ashworth Manor, while showing signs of neglect, retained enough of their original beauty to provide a romantic setting for their conversation. Ancient oak trees provided shelter from the autumn wind, and the last roses of the season bloomed bravely, despite the approaching winter. "Agnes," Percival said as they walked slowly along a gravel path, "I hope you will forgive my presumption in following you here, but I could not let your cousin's interference prevent us from exploring what I believe could be a remarkable partnership." "Your Grace," Agnes replied, her voice still shaky with disbelief, "I must ask again, are you truly serious about this? Because if this is some kind of elaborate jest or charitable gesture, I would rather know now before I allow myself to hope for something impossible." Percival stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Agnes, look at me. Do I seem like a man who would travel 2 days to Yorkshire for the sake of a jest? Do you think I would risk my reputation and social standing for a charitable gesture?" The intensity in his blue eyes was unmistakable, and Agnes felt her last doubts beginning to crumble. "But why?" she whispered. "Why me, when you could have any woman in England?" "Because," Percival said gently, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. Any other woman in England would want to marry the Duke of Ravenshollow. You are the first woman I have met who seems interested in marrying Percival Whitcomb, the man rather than the title. I don't understand the difference, Agnes said, though her heart was beginning to race at the implications of his words. The difference, Percival explained, is that you spoke to me with honesty rather than flattery, offered me practical partnership rather than decorative companionship, and showed me respect for my character rather than awe for my position. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? Agnes felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes as the full meaning of his words sank in. You truly mean it, don't you? You actually want to marry me. More than I have ever wanted anything in my life, Percival confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Agnes, I have been lonely for so long, surrounded by people who see only my title and fortune. You see me, the real me, and you value what you see. That is worth more to me than all the beauty and accomplishments in the world. But the scandal, Agnes protested weakly, though her resistance was crumbling with each word he spoke. Society will never accept such a match. Your family, your friends, your position will all survive the shock of my marrying for love rather than convenience, Percival finished firmly. Agnes, I am 42 years old. I have spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, fulfilling duties imposed by birth and circumstance. For once, just once, I want to follow my heart rather than society's expectations. He released her hands and stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. You spoke of making a man comfortable, of creating a home built on mutual respect and practical partnership. That is exactly what I want, what I have been searching for without even realizing it. Will you give me that gift, Agnes? Will you marry me? The proposal hung in the air between them, more beautiful and impossible than anything Agnes had ever dared to dream. She looked into his sincere blue eyes and saw not the Duke of Ravenshollow, one of the most powerful men in England, but simply Percival, a man who had been as lonely as she was, who valued the same things she valued, who was offering her not just security, but genuine partnership and affection. Yes, she whispered, the word barely audible but carrying all the hope and longing she had kept buried for so many years. Yes, Percival, I will marry you. The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming his aristocratic features with pure joy. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not the polite, restrained kiss of social convention, but the passionate kiss of a man claiming the woman he loved. Agnes had been kissed before, during her brief courtship years earlier, but nothing had prepared her for the intensity of Percival's embrace. She felt as though she were melting into him, her soft curves fitting perfectly against his strong frame, her heart racing with a mixture of desire and disbelief. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and staring at each other with wonder. I love you, Percival said simply, the words carrying a weight of sincerity that made Agnes's knees weak. I know it seems impossible after such a brief acquaintance, but I love your honesty, your strength, your practical wisdom and your courage. I love the woman you are, not some idealized version of what society thinks you should be. And I love you, Agnes replied, the words feeling strange and wonderful on her lips. I love your kindness, your integrity, your willingness to see value where others see only flaws. I love that you defended me when no one else would, that you followed me here when it would have been easier to forget about me entirely. They stood together in the garden, holding each other close and marveling at the extraordinary turn their lives had taken. 2 days earlier, they had been strangers. Now they were engaged, bound together by a love that had grown from mutual respect and genuine compatibility. When? Agnes asked finally, her practical nature asserting itself even in the midst of romantic euphoria. When can we be married? As soon as possible, Percival replied without hesitation. I see no reason to delay, and I suspect a long engagement would only give our critics more time to organize their opposition. What do you think about a special license and a quiet ceremony within the week? A week? Agnes felt a moment of panic at the speed of the proposed timeline. But I have nothing suitable to wear, no trousseau, no preparations. My dear Agnes, Percival said with a gentle laugh, you could marry me in sackcloth, and I would consider myself the most fortunate man alive. But if you wish for new clothes and proper preparations, we can certainly arrange that. Money is no object, and I want you to have everything your heart desires. The casual mention of his vast wealth reminded Agnes of the enormous change that was about to take place in her circumstances. From poverty and dependence to unlimited resources and the highest social position, it was almost too much to comprehend. Percival, she said hesitantly. "I want you to understand what you're taking on. I have no experience managing great wealth or moving in the highest circles of society. I know how to run a modest household and manage servants, but a ducal establishment is something entirely different. What if I embarrass you? What if I prove inadequate to the demands of being your duchess?" "Then you will learn," Percival said confidently. "Just as you learned to manage your cousin's household, just as you learned to survive on your own when your family failed to support you, you have intelligence, determination, and natural leadership abilities. The rest is simply a matter of scale and practice." He cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious and intent. "Agnes, I am not marrying you to gain a perfect duchess who never makes mistakes. I am marrying you to gain a partner who will face challenges with courage and honesty, who will support me in my duties while pursuing her own interests and goals. If you occasionally stumble while learning your new role, I will be there to steady you. If you make social mistakes, I will defend you just as I did in Lord Ashworth's drawing room." The promise in his voice was unmistakable, and Agnes felt the last of her fears beginning to dissolve. This man, this remarkable, powerful, kind man, was offering her not just marriage but true partnership, not just security but genuine love and support. "In that case," she said with a smile that transformed her plain face into something approaching beauty, "I accept your proposal completely and without reservation. When do we begin planning our wedding?" "Immediately," Percival replied, his satisfaction evident. "But first I believe we should inform your cousin of our engagement and make arrangements for your removal from her household. I suspect Lady Theodora will be quite cooperative once she understands the financial benefits of our union." They walked back toward the house hand in hand, both glowing with happiness and anticipation. As they approached the terrace, they could see Lady Theodora hovering near the French doors, clearly desperate to learn the outcome of their conversation. "Lady Theodora," Percival announced as they rejoined her in the drawing room, "I am delighted to inform you that Miss Bloomfield has accepted my proposal of marriage. We are engaged." The transformation in Lady Theodora's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her previous disdain for Agnes was replaced by a calculating smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How wonderful!" she exclaimed with obviously forced enthusiasm. "What a remarkable turn of events. Agnes, my dear, you must be absolutely thrilled." Agnes recognized the false warmth in her cousin's voice, but chose not to comment on it. She had more important things to focus on than Lady Theodora's sudden change of attitude. "Indeed I am," she replied simply. "His Grace has made me very happy." "And now," Percival continued, his tone becoming more businesslike, "we must discuss the practical arrangements. I will be taking Miss Bloomfield to London immediately to begin preparations for our wedding. I trust you will have no objections to her departure." "Of course not," Lady Theodora said quickly, clearly remembering the Duke's earlier hints about financial compensation. "Agnes must have the finest wedding possible, and London is certainly the place for such preparations." "Excellent. And Lady Theodora, I believe we discussed certain arrangements that would be mutually beneficial." "Yes, Your Grace. Indeed we did," Lady Theodora replied, her eyes lighting up with avarice. "I am most grateful for your generosity in this matter." Agnes looked between them with growing understanding. Percival had clearly offered her cousin some form of payment for her cooperation, which explained the dramatic change in Lady Theodora's attitude. While part of her was offended by the mercenary nature of the arrangement, she was also grateful that it removed the last obstacle to their happiness. "Then it is settled," Percival said with satisfaction. "Agnes, can you be ready to leave for London tomorrow morning?" "I can be ready within the hour," Agnes replied, causing both Percival and Lady Theodora to laugh at her eagerness. "Tomorrow morning will be soon enough," Percival said gently. "That will give us time to make proper arrangements and ensure that everything is handled correctly." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations and planning. Percival's secretary, Mr. Whitmore, proved invaluable in handling the practical details, while Lady Theodora suddenly became the most solicitous of hostesses, eager to accommodate the Duke's every wish. That evening, as Agnes packed her few belongings for the second time in a week, she reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had taken place in her life. A week ago, she had been a despised dependent, resigned to a life of servitude and loneliness. Now she was engaged to a duke, preparing to become one of the most powerful women in England. But more importantly than the change in her social position was the change in her sense of self-worth. For the first time in her life, she felt valued and loved for who she truly was, rather than dismissed for who she was not. Percival's love had given her confidence, hope, and the courage to believe that she deserved happiness. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, and she opened it to find Percival standing in the hallway, his expression tender and slightly uncertain. "I hope you don't mind my calling on you so informally," he said quietly, "but I wanted to make sure you were truly comfortable with the speed of our plans. If you need more time to adjust to the idea of marriage, to prepare yourself for the changes ahead, I will understand completely." Agnes smiled at his consideration, touched by his concern for her feelings, even in the midst of his own happiness. "Percival, I have been waiting my entire life for someone to value me as you do. Why would I want to delay claiming that happiness for even a day longer than necessary? And you're not afraid? Not overwhelmed by the magnitude of the change you're about to undergo?" "Terrified," Agnes admitted honestly, "but also exhilarated. I would rather face those fears with you beside me than spend another day in the safe, empty life I was living before." Percival's smile was radiant as he took her hands in his. "Then tomorrow we begin our new life together. And Agnes, I promise you that whatever challenges we face, we will face them as partners. You will never be alone again." As he kissed her goodnight and retreated to his own room at the inn, Agnes felt a sense of completion that she had never experienced before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and undoubtedly new obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in her life, she would not face them alone. She had found her place in the world, and more importantly, she had found someone who valued that place as much as she did. The fat woman who knew how to cook had become the beloved of a duke, and their love story was just beginning. The Duchess emerges. The journey back to London was a revelation for Agnes in more ways than one. Travelling in the Duke's luxurious carriage, attended by his efficient servants, and treated with the deference due to his future Duchess, she began to understand the magnitude of the life she was about to enter. But more importantly, the long hours of conversation during the journey allowed her and Percival to deepen their understanding of each other. They discussed everything from politics and literature to their hopes for their future together, and with each mile that passed, Agnes felt more confident that their hasty engagement was built on a solid foundation of genuine compatibility. "Tell me about your estate," she said as they paused to change horses at a coaching inn. "What will my responsibilities be as your Duchess?" Percival's eyes lit up with enthusiasm as he described Ravenshollow Park, his principal seat in Derbyshire. "It's been in my family for 3 centuries, and it employs nearly 200 people between the house and the farms. The Duchess traditionally oversees the household management, the estate's charitable activities, and the welfare of the tenants' families." 200 people, Agnes repeated, feeling slightly overwhelmed. "And they will all be looking to me for guidance and leadership." "They will," Percival confirmed, "but you won't be starting from nothing. Mrs. Pemberton, my housekeeper, has been managing things since Catherine's death, and she's both competent and loyal. She'll help you learn the routines and expectations, and I suspect you'll find that your natural organizational abilities will serve you well." Agnes nodded thoughtfully, already beginning to plan how she might approach her new responsibilities. The prospect was daunting but also exciting. She had always enjoyed the challenge of managing complex households, and the opportunity to do so on a grand scale appealed to her practical nature. "And what about London society?" she asked, voicing her greatest fear. "How will we handle the inevitable gossip and criticism?" "By presenting a united front and refusing to be ashamed of our choice," Percival replied firmly. "Agnes, I won't pretend that there won't be talk. There will be, and some of it will be unpleasant. But I have found that society's memory is surprisingly short, especially when presented with a fait accompli. Once we are married and you begin fulfilling your role as Duchess, people will adjust their expectations accordingly. And your family, your friends." Percival was quiet for a moment, and Agnes could see that this was a source of some concern for him as well. "My family will be surprised," he said finally, "but they are also practical people who understand the importance of my happiness. As for my friends, the ones worth keeping will support my choice, and the ones who don't weren't truly friends to begin with." Their arrival in London created exactly the sensation Percival had predicted. Within hours of their reaching his townhouse in Grosvenor Square, the news of the Duke of Ravenshollow's engagement to an unknown woman was spreading through the drawing rooms and clubs of fashionable society like wildfire. The reactions were as varied as they were intense. Some expressed shock and dismay at the Duke's apparent loss of judgment, others speculated about hidden scandals or secret motivations, and a few praised his courage in following his heart rather than social convention. But Agnes was largely insulated from the immediate storm of gossip by the whirlwind of wedding preparations that Percival set in motion. He had engaged the services of Madame Dubois, London's most exclusive modiste, to create a trousseau worthy of a duchess, and the woman arrived at Grosvenor Square with an army of seamstresses and assistants. "Magnifique!" Madame Dubois exclaimed, as she studied Agnes's figure with a professional eye. "Such beautiful curves, such elegant proportions. We will create for you gowns that celebrate your natural beauty rather than trying to hide it." For the first time in her life, Agnes found herself being fitted for clothes that were designed to flatter her fuller figure rather than disguise it. The wedding gown alone was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Brussels lace that made her feel like a queen, while the other gowns in her trousseau were elegant, sophisticated, and perfectly suited to her new station. "You look beautiful," Percival said when he saw her in one of the new day dresses, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Not just because of the clothes, but because you're beginning to see yourself as I see you, as a woman of worth and dignity who deserves to be dressed and treated accordingly." The wedding itself was a small, private ceremony held in the chapel of Percival's London residence. Only a handful of close friends and family members were present, including Percival's younger sister, Lady Margaret Ashford, who had surprised everyone by expressing enthusiastic approval of her brother's choice. "I like her," Lady Margaret had declared, after meeting Agnes for the first time. "She's genuine and intelligent, and she makes Percival happy in a way I haven't seen since Catherine died. Anyone who criticizes this match is a fool." As Agnes walked down the short aisle toward where Percival waited, she felt a sense of rightness and completion that she had never experienced before. This was her destiny, her place in the world, and the man waiting for her was not just her husband-to-be, but her partner, her champion, and her dearest friend. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving, with traditional vows that took on new meaning when spoken by two people who had found each other against all odds. When Percival placed the ducal coronet on her head during the ceremony, Agnes felt the weight of her new responsibilities settling around her like a mantle, but also the strength and confidence that came from knowing she was not facing them alone. "I present to you," the chaplain announced with obvious satisfaction, "His Grace the Duke of Ravenshollow and Her Grace the Duchess of Ravenshollow." The small congregation erupted in applause and congratulations, but Agnes was aware only of Percival's eyes on her face, warm with love and pride and satisfaction. "How does it feel to be a duchess?" he asked quietly, as they signed the marriage register. "Like coming home," Agnes replied honestly, "like finding the place I was always meant to be." The wedding breakfast that followed was elegant but intimate, allowing Agnes to practice her new social role in a supportive environment. She found herself relaxing into the conversation, her natural intelligence and warmth winning over even the most skeptical guests. "Your Grace," Lord Pemberton, one of Percival's oldest friends, said as he approached her during the reception, "I must confess that I was concerned when I heard about Percival's engagement to someone outside our usual circles, but having met you, I can see exactly why he was so determined to win your hand. You are a remarkable woman." "Thank you, Lord Pemberton," Agnes replied with a smile that was becoming more confident with each interaction. "I hope to prove worthy of the faith His Grace has shown in me." "My dear Duchess," Lord Pemberton said with obvious sincerity, "I believe you already have." As the afternoon wore on and the last guests departed, Agnes found herself alone with her new husband in the elegant drawing room of their London home. The magnitude of what had happened was beginning to sink in. She was now the Duchess of Ravenshollow, one of the most powerful women in England, married to a man who loved her for exactly who she was. "No regrets?" Percival asked, settling beside her on the silk-upholstered sofa and taking her hand in his. "None whatsoever," Agnes replied firmly, "though I must admit, I'm still having difficulty believing this is all real. A week ago, I was a despised dependent with no prospects and no hope. Now I'm married to the most wonderful man in England and have a position I never dared to dream of." "It's real," Percival assured her, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss, "and it's only the beginning. We have a lifetime ahead of us to build something beautiful together." "What happens now?" Agnes asked, suddenly aware that they were truly alone for the first time since their engagement. "Now," Percival said with a smile that made her heart race, "we begin our honeymoon. I thought we might spend a few days here in London, allowing you to adjust to your new role, and then travel to Ravenshollow Park so you can see your new home." "I would like that very much," Agnes said, though she felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of the more intimate aspects of marriage that lay ahead. Percival seemed to sense her apprehension, because his expression grew gentle and reassuring. "Agnes, I want you to know that there is no pressure, No expectations beyond what you are comfortable with. We have time to learn about each other, to grow into our marriage at whatever pace feels right to both of us. His consideration and patience only made her love him more, and Agnes felt her nervousness beginning to fade. Percival, I may be inexperienced, but I am not afraid. You have shown me nothing but kindness and respect, and I trust you completely. The kiss that followed was tender and passionate, full of promise for the future they would build together. As they held each other close in the elegant drawing room of their London home, both Agnes and Percival knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love that transcended social convention, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The fat woman who knew how to cook had become the beloved Duchess of one of England's most powerful men, and their love story was proving that sometimes the most unlikely matches could create the most extraordinary happiness. Outside, London society continued to buzz with gossip and speculation about the Duke's shocking choice of bride. But inside the walls of Grosvenor Square, two people who had found their perfect match in each other were beginning the greatest adventure of their lives, a marriage that would prove that true love could indeed conquer all. Did Agnes's incredible transformation from humiliated woman to beloved Duchess capture your heart? If this tale of unexpected love, where a duke's shocking response to brutal honesty changed everything, moved you, please like this story and subscribe for more captivating Victorian romances. Share this with someone who believes that true love sees beyond appearances and social expectations. Which moment touched you most? Agnes's brave honesty, the Duke's public defense, or their beautiful wedding? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest romantic adventures where love conquers all prejudices.